For more stories like these, go to www.social-tv.co.za, subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on our social mediums.
Very few people think about the living conditions of livestock, and an action brought by NSPCA with the support of the Humane Society International has called on South Africans to add their voice to prevent a shipment of between 55,000 and 85,000 live sheep to the Middle East. Now, can you imagine being stuck on a vessel for 21 days, being tightly packed together in pens, without proper food and care, standing in your own waste, breathing in pneumonia, and potentially dying of heat stress? Well, that's exactly what happened in 2016 when some 3,000 sheep died en route from Fremantle to Doha. On our social newscast today, we chat to Tony Gerrans, who is the Executive Director of HSI Africa. Tony, thank you very much for your time. Big battle looming in court at the moment. You guys have asked South Africans to support to ending the cruelty of live exports. Please tell us what's happening.
The NSPCA is back in court this Thursday, the 6th of August, to ask the court to implement an interim ban prohibiting the export of sheep from East London Harbour to Kuwait. Up to 85,000 sheep can be loaded on these livestock carriers, and they spend 3 weeks at sea on the same vessel before they are unloaded and slaughtered in Kuwait. We believe that the conditions that the animals will endure on that vessel are in many instances a contravention of our local Animal Protection Act. The Section 2, subsection 1 of that Act prohibits lots of the circumstances that are likely to be present on that vessel. So we support the NSPCA in their application and are hoping that the court will find accordingly and then rule that the current planned shipment may not go ahead. And then there is a second legal inquiry somewhere down the road where there would be a broader discussion about whether live export per se should be allowed from South Africa or not.
We obviously are not experts, so we don't understand the granular details of the action that the SPCA is taking. But many people will argue that this is an income and a revenue for South Africa. What are you guys against? You're against the fact that 85,000 live sheep will be exported, but you're not against the actual sale of the 85,000 live sheep.
That's correct. I think the Animal Protection Act provides certain minimum standards of conduct for all animals, including animals that are being bred for slaughter. So even though these animals will ultimately be killed while they're fairly young, we're obliged both by morals and by law to treat them with certain minimum standards until such time as they're slaughtered. And so we are precluded from inflicting unnecessary suffering on them. That's the wording of the statute. And even though this export business may create some jobs in the Eastern Cape, it doesn't necessarily follow then that should be given preference over compliance with the law. We're not oblivious to the pressing needs for rural development in the Eastern Cape and as a country as a whole. Job creation, also the transformation of our agricultural sector is important, and so the emerging farmer component is a significant concern there. But we believe it is just simply unsound to premise that development on what may be, depending on what the court finds on Thursday, an unlawful practice. We don't allow dog fighting simply because it creates jobs and revenue. We disallow that because the cruelty that it is premised on is morally and legally unacceptable. And we hold that the treatment of the sheep should be regarded the same way.
For those that don't understand, Tony, what are the kind of conditions that these thousands of sheep will experience over the 21 days of exporting?
So the vessel that's contemplated that they will travel on is a converted ship that has 8 decks, so up to 85,000, but maybe less. Animals will be loaded onto that vessel, and they will stay on that vessel for 21 days. So the vessel has hard steel floors. It obviously moves. There's light on the vessel. There's continuous mechanical noise. And the major concern about this journey is heat stress. So they will travel across the equator into an environment where both the absolute temperature and the relative humidity are significantly higher than the sheep would normally encounter. And so sheep have difficulty thermoregulating in these conditions. And so they are prone to heat stress. And on similar journeys from Australia, they've had large mortalities on some of these voyages, which has led to Australia implementing a seasonal moratorium on trading sheep across the equator. We're concerned that we don't have a similar moratorium, and so the sheep will be subjected to that same conditions. Also, this ship is not cleaned for the 21 days, so the sheep end up living in their own waste. And so in addition to suffering from the heat stress, there's always the possibility for them to suffer respiratory distress from inhaling all the fumes associated with the accumulation of biological waste on the voyage. Some of the weaker animals are prone to being trampled and can't get to the food pens. The food pens in some instances are automated and are not checked as regularly as we would like. And so some of the animals who are used to grazing on grasses and are now being fed pellets can't necessarily get access to the food and water. And with so many animals on board, it's simply practically impossible to verify the welfare of all these animals during the journey. And so those that might be injured or sick or suffer some other condition are often not found and treated and are left to their own devices for the duration of the journey. So the industry talks about mortalities of 2% being an acceptable level. You know, if you're shipping 80,000 sheep, 2% is 1,600 dead animals. And our view is those animals have suffered so extensively that they've actually died. What also of the animals that have suffered and not died? You know, their welfare is also a concern. And we think simply that confining such large numbers of animals, farmed animals, in such an unnatural environment for so long is unacceptable, especially when it's done in the pursuit of profits.
And your call to action and the action from the SPCA does not come out of the blue. I mean, in 2016, some 3,000 sheep died en route from Fremantle to Doha. And also the NSPCA inspectors themselves have reported cases where the animals were in complete distress and in injury and suffering during the voyages.
Yes. When Al-Mawashi first came to South Africa to establish the trade, the NSPCA were unequivocal that they felt that it was inherently harmful to animals and they would not support the trade. So I think that is the correct position, and we support that position. So the exporters who are now seeking for the court to grant permission for this trade had known from the outset that there would be objection to it. The NSPCA is a statutory created body that is empowered by law to protect animals against cruelty. In fact, they have a positive duty to do that. So they're often portrayed by industry as being setting unreasonable standards and you know, frustrating commerce. Well, that's a very small organization compared to the industries that they seek to have oversight over. And so our feeling really is that the trade must be recognized as being inherently harmful, and that the NSPCA should be allowed to do their work without obstruction. On previous voyages, they've had difficulty accessing the vessel, and you know, during the loading process, which can also be a time of welfare concern for the animals. So a lot of these concerns really devolve back to the circumstances surrounding dealing with such large numbers of animals in such a short period of time. Our thoughts also are, if we're seeking to promote development in the Eastern Cape or in South Africa generally. We shouldn't be prioritizing an extractive business like this. If we want to grow the sheep sector in South Africa, why not do it in a way with all the attendant jobs by processing the animals in this country? Why do we allow the animals to be exported in these circumstances which are prone to cruelty rather than developing the entire value chain in South Africa?
As the Humane Society International, you obviously, as you stated at the beginning, have lent your support to the court action by the NSPCA. Do you know, I know on the 6th of August, they're going back to court for the third time. Do you know where they are in that process at the moment?
Yes, so I think this will be the first time that the actual merits of the issues that we've been talking about will be considered by the court. The two previous hearings were largely procedural about whether the NSPCA had basis to approach the court on an urgent basis or not. And so those were procedural hearings as to whether the interim ban should stand or not, subject to what's going to be decided on Thursday. So Thursday will be the first time that the merits of the case are expounded at length in front of the judge. And the NSPCA's arguments in this regard are that, to my knowledge, that Section 2 of the Animals Protection Act contains 18 different prohibitions which are recognized categories of cruelty. And Section 2, subsection 1M, details circumstances that the sheep will be likely exposed to on this voyage. And the NSPCA is asking the courts to find the export unlawful accordingly. So 2.1m talks about it being an offence to convey or carry or confine an animal in such conditions or in such a manner or for such a period of time or over such a distance so as to cause that animal unnecessary suffering, or to put that animal in conditions which afford inadequate shelter, light, those are not applicable, but ventilation, or in which circumstances such animal is excessively exposed to heat and without making adequate provision for suitable food, potable water, and rest. So that is the basis of the NSPCA's action, saying that if these sheep were to be transported within South Africa, there's no doubt that that section would apply, and if they were found to be outside or in circumstances which are in contravention of that section, the person responsible would be guilty of an offence. And we're hoping that the court will hold that to be the case for the transport on the ship as well.
Final question, Tony. Just on the back of that, you've asked South Africans to lend their voice. What would you like South Africans to do?
We think South Africans generally have shown in the past that they abhor cruelty. When there was a parliamentary colloquium on the lion bone trade, for example, large numbers of South Africans indicated that that type of cruelty inherent in that trade is unacceptable. And when the NSPCA previously had a petition against this live export, I understand over 70,000 people signed that petition. That's a significant number of people who say they don't want to be associated with this cruel trade, and South African animals shouldn't be subject to that. So we're asking the public to make their voice heard in this instance by raising awareness, firstly, because many people don't know that this is happening, and a lot of people assume that the regulations in South Africa would preclude this, but we don't have specific regulations about live transport on sea. So the first thing is education. And the second thing is that we think that the departments, the Minister of Agriculture and the Eastern Cape Department, who issues the permit for the export, need to be made aware that the public as a whole is not supportive of this trade. And the red meat industry, we would like them to also take a stronger position against this trade. The Livestock Welfare Coordinating Committee has issued a statement saying that they do not support live export of animals, which is consistent with our position and that of the NSPCA. And we would like the agricultural industry in South Africa to recognize public sentiment in this regard and then to discontinue the export of live animals.
That's Tony Gerrans, HSI Africa's Executive Director, talking to us about legal action brought by the National Council of SPCAs against the live export of between 55 and 85,000 live sheep to the Middle East.